Black Inside, I think very directly is an exhibition that deals with two large topics of mass incarceration and racism in the United States.
So I want to just tell you a really brief story about how we all came to be here this evening. So about a little more than a year ago, a dear friend and colleague of mine, Ryan Holland, suggested that I connect to Miriam Cava and Project Nia, and he was singing her praises and some of the awesome work that they do. So then I read more about her and her work and this installation. I said, okay, I have to work with Miriam, I have to work with Project Nia. This makes great sense. We have gallery space. What do we need to do?
My name is Miriam Cava, and I am the director of Project Nia, which is an organization here in Chicago that is determined and trying to basically end youth incarceration. Basically, Black Inside is the culmination of many years of work that I've done around the prison industrial complex, specifically around dismantling the prison industrial complex. I started collecting artifacts around prisons about over 15 years ago.
Black Inside is an exhibit that hopefully gives people a lot more insight into the very particular history of slavery in the U.S. and maybe for people who are activists, maybe knowing that history a little better gives us tools to understand, like, hey, there are people who've resisted this system for as long as it's been here. So what do we learn from them?
About a year ago, in January, I was contacted by Miriam Cava, who is an activist and educator and founder of Project Nia. And we had worked before on a project co-curating an exhibit at the Hull House Museum on juvenile detention. So her work as an activist and a collector of the artifacts here led her to think about organizing it in a way to publicly exhibit it. So she contacted me in January and asked me, would you like to work on an exhibit together with me? And I was absolutely amazed because I didn't know that she was a collector of these artifacts. I knew her only as an activist, so when she invited me, I couldn't refuse.
We know we're living with the current day prison industrial complex. We know it's like this huge monster of a thing that has a really long history. So what are our creative approaches to sort of think about that and talk about that? And how do we go forward? What do we do? Should we do like peace circles? Should we illustrate books? Should we do conflict resolution programs? Should we do giant protests? Like what should we do? And I think that this exhibit felt like one thing amongst many things that a community of people who are interested in these issues could bring together.
So the benefit, I think, of a community curated exhibit is that you have multiple voices that are contributing to the project and are shaping the narrative that's being presented. So in this case, Miriam and I probably have the strongest voices in this exhibit, particularly Miriam knowing the history and being the collector of these artifacts. But as well, we did consult and talk to many other activists in the community who also gave us their opinion and shared their knowledge and expertise with us too, and then helped us make some critical decisions about what to put in the exhibit.
It's really just about bringing out some of these stories of these people, and that partly has to happen visually as much as it has to happen in the text. And I think Miriam and Teresa did a really awesome job making a text that could kind of tell the story in a narrative way, and then there's like a visual side to that, you know, and people engage different ways with information, so it's important to offer, you know. And we had an audio element where you could hear some musical recordings, some speeches, and I think that was meaningful to people in different ways.
The main questions we really want to ask is, you know, how did we get here, and is it possible for us to reverse course around this issue of mass incarceration? And we think that because we lack historical perspective about kind of the origins and history of mass incarceration, this limits our ability to come up with viable solutions to this problem. So the Black Inside features an array of original vintage photographs, postcards of Black prisoners, chain gangs, information and artifacts about Black activists who used jail and jail-ins, used the carceral state, basically, the prison apparatus, as a way to fight back against racism in the 60s through the freedom movement. We look at Black political prisoners, so we have pieces about Angela Davis and George Jackson.
Political prisoners have existed for as long as prisons have existed. Political dissidents have always been targeted, but the figures that we talk about in Black Inside are a little bit different. They were not political prisoners initially. They became radicalized once they went into prison and learned a little bit about the system, and living it day by day decided to go against it and to work against it and to speak out against it and to write about it.
So really we look at the full scope of the history of Black people in the United States and how incarceration has played out in various moments of our history here.
I think for me, one of the most interesting stories is the Laura Scott story, which is, I think, our fourth section. We talk about and try to expose or bring to light the story of an African American woman. There are very few stories about African American women who are told in our history books or really talked about. Miriam decided to pursue, based on the information that was in her mugshot, to see what we could discover, and found out what we thought was a fabulous story of a very self-determined, transgressive woman of the 19th century. And late 19th century, early 20th century. She was imprisoned twice in 1905 and 1908. So we present photographs in the exhibit of what her life was like in Los Angeles when she was in San Quentin prison, the prison cell that she possibly was incarcerated in. But Miriam Kaba also wrote a beautiful zine about her story, shaping what we know based on records.
She's a woman who is a 19th century woman, Black woman. She came from Alabama, moved to Los Angeles, and found herself in conflict with the law. She was arrested for grand larceny and petty larceny, so for robbery, for stealing things, and she usually stole very minor things. But I found her Bertillon card online in January of this year, and I bought it. And I never look into the backgrounds and history of the people that I usually, get mugshots for. But for some reason, she really spoke to me. It was her hat. Her hat's amazing. It just is. And I really felt this kinship with this woman, and I wanted to know who she was.
Miriam has collected these artifacts for over 15 years, and what we actually present in the exhibit is only a third of what her collection is. So we were inspired by the physical artifacts that she has and decided to organize those together to tell this story. We worked also with a smart exhibition designer to help us reimagine the gallery space in the African American Cultural Center. We really wanted to bring the space to life, to present this in the best way possible and the most engaging way possible for audiences.
I've never been so super excited to walk into a white room with art on the wall, so like for me, just like figure out how to make it colorful and put stuff like low to the ground and high up, so like little kids can have an experience at the same time that like really tall people, like whatever, just thinking about that stuff. So that's kind of where I came in. Maybe like most compelling part of working on this was just like sitting at my house with these like press photos and like all these documents that were original documents that I'd never seen, and I had to like stare at them really closely because I was designing brochures or I was trying to figure out how to blow them up or whatever, like figuring out how do we show these to people. But I just spent all this time like looking at photographs really closely, and I don't know, that was a really profound experience for me, because I was like, man, the more that I look at these photos, the more I feel like we almost don't need to design anything. We just need to make a way for people to look at these photos because they have everything that we want to show.
Doing your kind of classic object and label, how do we make this a little bit more real for audiences? And so when you go throughout the exhibit, you do see a lot of images that are blowing up, and we wanted to make those things more real and have a more impact by blowing up the photographs. Particularly when you enter the exhibit, there's a photograph of a prisoner and a slave that are juxtaposed, and they're larger than life and there's no way to avoid them, and it's in your face, and it makes you really think about how we have treated our citizens in the past. With the political prisoners, we also profile them with a large photograph too, to bring to life, to familiarize people with what these folks look like. They're real people that have worked around these issues for a long time, and were the inspiration for this exhibit.
You know, it reminded me, you know, like when I would walk into the room when I saw the exhibit, that like these are people's lives. You know, it's not as if we're so detached from this history, and it's not as if some of it's not even that long ago.
We had no grants to do this project. We got no money to do it from anybody. We have just cobbled it together through in-kind donations. So the money that African American Cultural Center contributed to helping us to be able to build the cell, or to get food for an event, or they paid for one of the printing for the Laura Scott printing, but we kind of just have cobbled together money to do all this stuff, buying the panels and doing everything else, just acting on faith that it would work out and that we would find a way to be able to pull this together. And so it is possible to do these kinds of projects without major funding.
One of the goals of the Black Inside exhibit is to move people from receiving knowledge and into action. And so what we want people to do is to gain a critical awareness of this history, but also to walk away asking themselves questions. Why is this still happening?
I think a lot of people came away, even if they felt they knew a lot about the topic, they came away thinking like, oh, I learned something I was not really that familiar with, and that maybe changes my perception a little bit. And I think it's just like really awesome to see a group of people on a not very humongous budget, you know, put together something that's meaningful.
Do you know your history? Have you been Angela Davis? Pleated skirts, picket sign in hand, sometimes at night, sometimes at midnight when men are coming after you, sometimes when you're moving. Do you know your history? Do you know where you come from? Haunted by what we know, haunted by letters from jail cells, haunted by the boys in prisons now, the sons and the brothers and the fathers who are writing to their kids, writing to their daughters, their wives, the ones who haven't seen them in years, the ones who haven't kissed them, who don't know about their history.
The technique of enslaving is more sophisticated these days. Right over here, number 9, the Prison Industrial Complex. It features dope, and the dope is, by being addictive, is in itself enslaving.
I've never been to an exhibit like this before, never. And everything that I've looked at, from the Angela Davis work over here, from the wanted sign, like just looking at how we were able to come together in this time, I'm sure we were able to do the same thing back then. It was just harder. It was probably much scarier than any of us could ever imagine.
Well, the basic misunderstanding that people have about freedom is that they don't understand that authority is in a direct contradiction to freedom. So they thought that when, quote, slavery was abolished, they were free. No one is free where authority exists.
I've come from slaves' land. I've come from someone who was just bought and sold, like property. That's it. Nothing more, like nothing less. You were just something to be moved between cities. And look at where we are now. I mean, we still have a ways to go. We still have to come together as a community. But exhibits like this that paint the pictures, that tell the stories, that talk about all the people that we've never known of, we don't know of, that we don't have the time to sometimes look for. Like, they did it for us and put it up on walls and painted it, and they're teaching us.